Okay, so when we think about war, the classic image pops up, right? Soldiers, tanks, planes.
The big battlefield clashes, yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. But that picture, it feels increasingly, well, old-fashioned. What we're actually seeing unfold more and more is this murkier, more complicated kind of conflict. People are calling it hybrid warfare.
That's the term, yeah. And it's definitely moved beyond just, armies meeting face to face. If you look at the analysis from SideBySide, which we're digging into today, it's clear that modern conflicts are a real mix.
A mix.
Like how? Well, you've got your conventional military power, sure, but it's operating right alongside things like sophisticated cyber attacks, massive disinformation campaigns.
Propaganda, basically.
Yep, propaganda, fake news, the works. Plus economic pressure using trade or finance as a weapon and deploying proxy forces, militias or private groups fighting on behalf of a state.
Got it. So this deep dive, we're really focusing on getting our heads around this shift. We're using this side-by-side piece as our guide to unpack what hybrid warfare actually is.
Right. It's history, what makes it tick, where we're seeing it happen.
And why it's so important to understand now. Because, like the article highlights, the lines between war and peace are getting really blurry.
Seriously blurry. Think Russia and Ukraine, or China's moves in the South China Sea. It's often not a clear-cut war declaration anymore.
Okay. So our mission today is to trace this evolution, break down the key tools of hybrid conflicts, look at some real-world examples, and understand the challenges.
And ultimately show why just thinking in terms of traditional military strength isn't enough anymore and what countries are starting to do about it.
Right. So let's start maybe with the history. SideBySide lays out this evolution. This whole hybrid thing didn't just appear out of nowhere, did it?
No, absolutely not. The article gives a pretty neat four-stage breakdown. It starts way back with pre-industrial warfare, ancient times up to, say, the 18th century.
Roman legions, knights in shining armor, swords and bows.
Exactly. Close combat, early firearms. Then things changed dramatically with the Industrial Revolution.
So 19th, 20th century, mechanized armies, tanks, planes, and eventually nukes. World War I, World War II, that kind of scale.
Precisely. Just a massive scaling up of destructive power. But then later in the 20th century, early 21st, we saw the rise of something different. Asymmetric warfare.
That's where you have insurgents or guerrilla groups taking on a much larger, more conventional military.
You got it. Think Vietnam or the conflicts in Afghanistan. Unconventional tactics against a stronger foe.
And that leads us here to hybrid warfare. It sounds like it's not replacing the old ways entirely, but kind of layering everything together.
That's a really good way to put it. SideBySide defines it as strategically combining conventional military stuff with cyber attacks, info wars, economic pressure, and those proxy groups we mentioned. It's the blend that's key.
Okay, so you might have troops on the ground, maybe some drones, but at the same time, hackers are trying to take down the power grid.
While disinformation campaigns are flooding social media.
And maybe some economic sanctions are squeezing the target.
And groups like, say, the Wagner Group were operating in the shadows. It's this whole toolkit being used.
A really diverse toolkit.
Yeah.
And the article stresses that a lot of this happens below the threshold of what we normally call war, right?
Yeah.
Kind of in the gray zone.
Exactly. Deliberately ambiguous actions. Harmful, coercive, yes, but designed not to trigger a full-blown military response. That ambiguity makes them incredibly tough to counter.
Okay, let's dive into those tools a bit more. SideBySide calls cyber warfare the invisible battlefield. Sounds about right.
Yeah, and the potential damage is huge. They mentioned the 2017 NotPetya attack attributed to Russia, but it hit globally. Cost something like $10 billion in damages, shipping, healthcare, you name it.
$10 billion. Wow. That really shows how connected and maybe vulnerable everything is digitally.
It really does. And then you had that more recent incident, 2024, the U.S. power grid hack. Suspected Chinese links there.
Crippling essential services.
Yeah.
That's a scary thought.
It is. And moving from cyber, there's the whole information space. Disinformation, psychops, social media as a weapon.
It's wild to think tweets or fake videos can destabilize things. The article mentions those Russian troll farms trying to mess with elections in the US and Europe.
A prime example. And it gets more sophisticated. Deepfakes, for instance. They mentioned fake videos in 2023 showing Ukrainian officials supposedly surrendering. How do you even tell what's real anymore?
That's a huge challenge. Okay.
Yeah.
What about the economic side? SideBySide brings up China's debt trap diplomacy.
Yeah, the Sri Lanka Hambantota port case is pretty stark. Using loans to gain control of strategic assets, its economic leverage big time.
It's power projection without firing a shot.
And similar vein, Russia using its gas supplies as a weapon against Europe, cutting them off in 2022, 2024. Weaponizing energy.
Right, and the last tool mentioned proxies and private military companies like Wagner.
Before their mutiny in 2023, yeah. Operating in Africa, Ukraine, allowing the sponsoring state to keep some distance. Plausible deniability.
Makes it harder to blame the state directly, I guess.
Definitely. SideBySide also points to Iran using militias in Iraq and Syria to push back against U.S. influence without direct confrontation.
Okay, so those are the pieces. How do they fit together in practice? Let's look at those case studies. Russia and Ukraine, starting in 2014.
Oh, yeah, that's textbook hybrid. You had the conventional military moves in 2014 and then the full-scale invasion in 2022.
But also cyber attacks, right?
Right.
Like that Viasat hack that messed up communications.
Exactly. And a massive ongoing information war. Outlets like RT, Sputnik, pushing the pro-Russian narrative relentlessly.
Plus the economic levers, the gas cutoffs, blocking grain exports from the Black Sea, affects global food prices. It's all connected.
Totally interconnected. Then there's the second case, China in the South China Sea. More of a gray zone approach there.
Meaning?
Less outright invasion, more gradual pressure. Building and militarizing those artificial islands, for instance.
Changing the map, basically.
Pretty much. Alongside that, cyber attacks on neighboring governments like ASEAN members. And economic coercion, too, like banning Filipino fishing boats. Little nudges, constant pressure.
Subtle but effective, potentially. And the third case, Iran in the Middle East.
Here, the proxy forces are really central. Groups like Hezbollah in Lebanon, the Houthi rebels in Yemen, extending Iran's reach.
And SideBySide mentions cyber too, attacks on Saudi oil facilities.
Yep, impacting global energy. Plus, ongoing disinformation campaigns, especially targeting Israel. It shows conflict happening on multiple levels simultaneously across a whole region.
These examples really drive home how complex this is. Which brings us to the challenges SideBySide highlights. Why is this stuff so hard to deal with?
Well, first off, there's what they call the attribution problem.
Figuring out who actually launched the cyber attack or started the fake news campaign.
Exactly. It's way harder than seeing whose tank crossed your border.
Yeah.
The internet allows for so much obfuscation, routing attacks through multiple countries.
Makes sense. And legal gaps, too.
Big time. International law, like the Geneva Conventions, was written mostly before this stuff was even conceived of. Does a massive cyber attack count as an armed attack justifying self-defense? What about economic warfare? The law is struggling to keep up.
And you always worry about escalation, right? Respond too strongly to something ambiguous, and you might trigger a bigger conflict you didn't want.
It's a very fine line to walk. Interestingly, SideBySide also mentions some criticisms of the whole hybrid warfare idea itself.
Oh, like what?
Some say the term gets thrown around too much, becomes a catch-all that maybe hides the specifics of what's actually happening.
Kind of loses its meaning if it means everything.
Sort of. And there's a critique that sometimes it might be used to excuse failures by Western countries maybe not reacting effectively enough early on in Ukraine, for instance.
That's an interesting point. The language itself matters.
It does. But looking ahead, the article points to some pretty sobering future trends. AI is a big one.
Artificial intelligence in war. Autonomous drones deciding targets.
Yeah.
AI generating super convincing propaganda.
Yeah, that's the direction things seem to be heading. Autonomous weapons raise huge ethical questions, obviously. Algorithmic bias is another worry.
What if the AI gets it wrong?
Exactly. Then there's space becoming a warfighting domain. Satellite jamming, we saw that with Starlink in Ukraine. Anti-satellite weapons?
So conflict literally going into orbit.
Seems like it. And maybe the scariest is biowarfare risks. Lab-engineered pathogens as weapons.
Yeah, that's deeply unsettling. So given all this, how are nations adapting? What are they doing?
Well, SideBySide notes things like NATO's 2024 hybrid response strategy. They're trying to integrate cyber and info-war defense right into their main structures.
So acknowledging it's part of the modern battlefield.
Definitely. And the U.S. setting up the Space Force explicitly to deal with orbital threats. Another sign of adaptation. It's a constant adjustment.
So wrapping this up, this deep dive, drawing on SideBySide, really shows a massive shift, doesn't it? Away from just military might.
Absolutely. The article frames it well. If old war was politics by other means, maybe hybrid war is politics by all means. You have to defend against so much more now. Cyber, info, economic.
Which leads to that final big question SideBySide poses. Are we actually prepared for this new kind of battlefield?
A crucial question. And they leave us with some tough follow-ups to think about.
Like, how can democracies fight disinformation without crushing free speech? That's a real dilemma.
And will AI make future wars more controllable or less? Nobody really knows the answer to that yet.
And can international law possibly adapt fast enough to put some guardrails around all this hybrid activity?
These are the vital questions for the coming years. The side-by-side analysis gives us a really valuable map for understanding these complex, evolving threats. It's a stark reminder of what security looks like in the 21st century.